Dr William McCrea.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the revelation that has emerged about the so-called On the Runs administrative scheme demonstrates that the previous government committed a monstrous betrayal of the rights of many of its own citizens. They actively conspired with Sinn Féin, the political wing of Provisional IRA, to deny hundreds of UK citizens the prospect of ever seeing justice for their relatives who have been murdered or injured as part of the terrorist campaign waged by the IRA in Northern Ireland and in Great Britain. The collapse of the trial of Mr John Downey, if it achieved nothing else, at least brought out into the open the nefarious plot which our own government at the time had a hand in. It is now time to establish the full and complete truth about this scheme. Who started it, who knew about it, what other agencies were implicated in it. There are now no fewer than 4 separate inquiries of different natures taking place into this scheme, and I welcome each and every one of them, and I do believe that they can complement each other. Before we progress into some of the details about this issue, it is worth looking at first principles. When they were elected to office in 1997, the Labour government headed by Tony Blair vowed to be the most open and transparent government that the country has ever had. To that end, they introduced, among other things, the Freedom of Information Act, designed to ensure that within the limits of data protection, national security, people will be able to scrutinise the work of those who govern them. It is contrary to the commitment to openness and transparency that no government minister ever saw fit to come to this House and inform members of a dirty deal that was going on with Sinn Féin IRA. It is at variance with the other actions of previous governments in opening up government to public accountability. That they would even keep an important matter hidden from the scrutiny not only of this House, but also, I believe, Her Majesty's opposition at that time and all the other Northern Ireland parties, except, of course, Sinn Féin. This raises an important political point. In Northern Ireland, progress is dependent upon mutual consent of both the major traditions that exist within our community. Unionists, despite the fact that there has been a consistent and vast majority of support for the Union throughout the duration of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, recognise that there is a necessity to find accommodation with those who hold to the minority viewpoint with regard to Ulster's constitutional position. In such context, the very fact that the government connived behind the backs of the Unionist community to deliver the scheme was bad enough, but their action also represented a betrayal of the constitutional nationalist tradition in Northern Ireland. The government acted in a secretive and one-sided fashion because they knew that had the details of this scheme been made public, they would have not been able to carry either this House or the greater number of people, both from the Unionist and nationalist backgrounds in Northern Ireland. They knew that they were doing wrong, and that is why that they tried to hide their actions from everyone, except themselves as a government and Sinn Féin. The Bible says the wicked flee when no man pursueth. That seems apt today, because the government fled from scrutiny, but no one pursued because they tried to hide what they were doing. But this sordid deal could not remain hidden forever. The secret scheme whereby one political party submitted names of individuals who were on the run to receive so-called comfort letters was not just simply immoral, but represented a subversion of justice and made a mockery of the rule of law. When clear and direct questions were asked previously, including of senior ministers at the time, about this scheme, for example, in the House in October 2006, they asked if such a procedure existed. We were told there is no other procedure. When the Honourable Lady from North Down, 1st of March 2007, asked what measures the government are considering to deal with on the runs, other than further legislation or an amnesty, and the right honourable gentleman from Meath replied, none. That one word answer raises a serious question about the veracity of the then government's position, and it is right to establish whether or not this House of Commons has been deceived. We need to have the truth. As I've said, there are different inquiries looking into this matter. Each inquiry complements each other. It is vital that together they exhaustively examine all the relevant information and question all the relevant people. It is now apparent that there were no lengths to which the Blair administration would not stoop in the interests of political expediency. Those who carried out some of the most heinous crimes must never be allowed to escape responsibility for the suffering they created. The victims of those crimes cannot escape their pain, and those victims should have the right to bring the perpetrators to justice. The outcome of the Downey case was morally wrong. No one should be beyond the law. If someone is on the run, I want them to fear the police, the courts and the rule of law. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm exceedingly grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for allowing me to intervene in him. While tribute has quite rightly been paid on both sides of the House to the victims of the Hyde Park bombing in 1982, and I add my condolences to those families who lost their loved ones in that case, and indeed to their friends as well. It is, I think, right to put on the record that the Downey case shows that Mr Downey walked out of the Old Bailey, and not only had he been suspected of involvement in the Hyde Park bombing, but also in the Enniskillen bombing, in which many people lost their lives and many others were injured, and also the murder of 2 UDR members of the Ulster Defence Regiment who served gallantly in Northern Ireland.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for North Down for her intervention, and I wholeheartedly agree with every thing that she has had to say. The shadow, of course, even over this debate, is not only of the Hyde Park bombing, but every other atrocity that was carried out during the campaign throughout the United Kingdom, and there was no justification for the campaign of terror. There was no justification for the slaughter of the innocent, and this House ought to unreservedly once again condemn the actions of the IRA and those who brought sorrow and grief to the United Kingdom for so many years. The only thing about the Downey case, thankfully the Downey case has now exposed all those others who have received the letters, and probably I would suggest he may not be the favourite cousin of all the others who have received, as they believed, their letters of comfort. I realise I have to draw my remarks to a close, but I could say this as far as, and I want to clarify this. If someone is on the run, I want them to fear the police, the courts and the rule of law. I want them to fear the fact that one day justice may catch up with them. And I can assure them today that if it does not catch up with them here on this earth, that they will stand before God, and whether they believe in God or not, they will face his judgment and his wrath. In the aftermath of the Downey case judgment, the Secretary of State said, "We will take whatever steps are necessary to make clear to all recipients of letters arising from the administrative scheme, in a manner that will satisfy the courts and public, that any letters issued cannot be relied upon to avoid questioning or prosecution for offences which information or where information or evidence is now or later becomes available." We, as a Democratic Unionist Party, will insist that the government follow up these words with concrete action. I want to just finally say, Madam Deputy Speaker, it has been mentioned the royal prerogative of mercy. I live and have lived for this last nearly 50 years in a community that went through the nightmare of terrorism. South Londonderry used to be the killing fields as far as the IRA murders in our province. And I gathered with many widows and many children down those years, as with my own family too, and grieving and sorrowing over the passing of their loved ones. But when I hear that someone the likes of Liam Averill, a murderer in my community, has supposed to have received the royal prerogative of mercy, that is absolutely disgusting. Disgusting. And I would like to know, not only, it's laughable in a certain way that the big Provo hero crawls to Her Majesty to get a royal prerogative of mercy, but it is disgusting and sickening. And I would like to know who advanced his name and who advised Her Majesty to execute the royal prerogative of mercy for the likes of the murdering thug of Liam Avlo. I'd like also to know the rest of the other names of those who received the royal prerogative of mercy, because I can assure you there was no mercy. There was no mercy from the Provost on my family and the other families in Northern Ireland that suffered the grief and to this day suffer the heartbreak of the loss of their loved ones.